These travel journals that I made from a lot of the trips that I've done, but I don't have any travel journals from the places that I've actually lived because I've done a lot of artwork instead at those places. So I went to Penn High and... Hold it. You're late.
I got to introduce you. I'd like to welcome you to the gallery today. I'd also like to welcome back Melanie Mehrer to Penticton and to Wanderlust. She's been away for a number of years. As if you were here last night, you sort of heard a little bit of our story of how we met, but we met in Victoria years ago and her family adopted me, and I've been a great fan of Melanie. It's also, I forgot to mention last night, Melanie actually did work here years ago as one of our summer creative kids camp leaders. And I remember at that time I used to come by here and I got offered a job in Penticton, and Candy Foran, who was here, I mean in Grand Forks. And I turned it down at the time, and Candy was always sort of, thought it was the stupidest decision I made. But years later I got offered the job again, and then ultimately I ended up here. And Renee phoned me up one day and said I was stealing her life, because this is a job she wanted at one point. But I was Melanie's sister. But it's really wonderful that I'm able to show Melanie's work here today, have her talk about her work. And I think it's an incredible body of work of a lifetime's worth of experiences, traveling around the world, collecting ephemera, basically documenting her life and travels, which are seen in her fabulous journals here, which I will find a screw to get in there eventually. But she's got one here in her hands that she can pass around to you to have a look at, and I'm sure she'll talk a lot about them. And then after this, at 2 o'clock, we'll all move into the main gallery, and Nick Bantock will be talking about his work in his exhibition there. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Melanie Mehrer. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'll start again. So I went to Penn High, and after Penn High, I went to the Dominican Republic. I was an exchange student there for a year. And then I came back and I went to Okanagan College in Kelowna for a year, and I did visual arts there, and then I made the switch to art history. So I have a degree from UVic in art history, where I met Paul, who was also doing art history at the time, and my sister was doing visual arts, so we became very good friends, and
Not immediately.
Not immediately. I didn't like him at first. But he grew on me like a mold. Anyway, so yeah. So after I did art history, I did what many art students did. They came out and realized that they could not get a job in Canada that paid more than $8 an hour. So this is how, at the time, it wasn't my real decision. I felt like I was forced into going to Taiwan to teach English. But, you know, as many things happen in life, I realized it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. At the end, I had a great experience, and I became an English teacher. So while I was in Taiwan, I managed to go to Japan and visit a friend of mine, and she lived in Osaka, and we ended up going to Kyoto for a day trip, and we went to this printmaking museum, and they had all these really great woodblock prints, and I think you've probably seen Japanese woodblock prints, but they're not anything, if you see a picture of it, if you actually see it and see the texture and all the work that goes into those, they're amazing. So that's where I started to realize maybe I should do some lino prints and get into lino prints when I got back to Taiwan. So I got back to Taiwan, and it was really difficult to find the art store because everything was written in Chinese. So you can imagine I had to ask around, and finally someone said, oh, there's an art store on the 2nd floor of the building that I passed every day. But of course, how could I know there was an art store on the 2nd, you know, when everything's written in Chinese characters? So I found that they had these printmaking supplies that were really cheap, which was great for me because I thought, you know, I'm trying to pay off my big student loan. So I bought all these art supplies, and I started making all sorts of prints. And you don't see those ones here because I found out in a very difficult way that they were cut with vegetable oil. In Taiwan, to cut the paint, they use the cheap ones. They use vegetable oil. Of course, vegetable oil is edible, and there are lots of cockroaches in Taiwan. So I remember looking at some paintings or some prints on my wall, and there were these little lines that were sort of taken out of these paintings or prints on the wall. And one night, in the middle of the night, I just thought, oh, what are the cockroaches? And I turned on the light, and sure enough, they were eating my paint. So I didn't see any of those because they got turfed, and I came back to Canada, and so everything you see here is actually made with Canadian printmaking ink, so just not cut with vegetable oil. So The story behind these is actually quite funny. I was teaching a class one day, and I had a couple little boys in my class, and they had this comic book, and they were so into it. So I'd be teaching, and I'd turn around, and I'd look, and there they are with this book, you know, reading it in the corner. And I'd be like, put it away. So they'd put it away. I'd turn around, look back, sure enough, the book's out again. Right? Well, this happened about 4 or 5 times, so finally I said, if I see that book one more time, I'm going to take it away, and I'm not going to give it back. It will be mine. And they were like, okay, okay. I love time with these kids because they believe you when you say things like that. Anyway, so sure enough, a couple minutes later, I turned around and there they were. So I grabbed it. And I was going to keep it. I took it back to the staff room and I'm sitting there flipping through this book going, wow, this guy, I think it was the man and the dog here. And I thought, these are really cool. I really like these. Maybe, you know, my creative juices are going, maybe I could do some prints like this and maybe I could use some Chinese paper, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden I look up and there are these 2 little boys and their mother. And I was like, oh no. So I went out and they were like, please, Miss Melanie, we want our book back, please. So I made them do jumping jacks, tell me how much they loved me, do all these crazy things. And I gave them back their book. So I was like, well, there goes that idea. Well, the next week, the little boys came back with the book, tossed it on my desk and said, we don't need it anymore, you can have it. So I was like, yes. So I started making these prints, and you can see what these are. These are some of the earlier ones. This is Chinese paper that I bought in Taiwan, and I literally did all of these on my living room floor that Paul slept on at one time. So yeah, so I cut paper. What I did is I would photocopy it. I print it once, photocopy the whole image, and then I would cut and paste and collage all the colors back into it. So all the color that you see here are separate pieces of paper that have been cut out and then put together like a puzzle. And then once that's all done, it takes a really long time to do this, actually. It's printed one more time with the non-cockroach eating breed ball. Good to me. So that's how those were made. And yeah, I just really like the images. And this one here I made specifically for a friend of mine who's an animator. And he's really into Japanese girls, so I made that one. And the 2 on the end, we've got the Raging Granny. And when I was going to university, it was during the whole Clackwood Sound thing. And so that one's kind of a play, because the Raging Grannies are a big part of Clackwood Sound. So in a way, it's Taiwan, but it's also kind of reaching back to Canada. Little Crying Girl of Kyoto. I called her the Little Crying Girl of Kyoto, because that was the first place I saw the woodblock prints. And this one's for my dad here, because he's a hunter, and but he's not an Asian hunter. So, but anyway, my dad is a hunter, so I saw this one and thought of Dad.
What do the words say?
The hunter. Oh, this one. Pow, pow, pow. Yeah. So this one says pow, pow, pow.